BryanCallen.com for all my stand-up dates. I'll be in Canada, going to Edmonton. By the time you see this, it'll probably be done. All the shows are almost sold out. Nashville, Zanies, March 2 to 4. And then I'm in New York, March 11th, Sony Hall. And then I got Nyack, New York. And just go to BryanCallen.com. All right. My guest today is Chris Ryan. Dr. Chris Ryan wrote a book called Sex at Dawn, another book called Civilized Death. And he has a very different take on things like monogamy, sex, and all the other things. He kind of harkens back to how we were in the hunter-gatherer days. And I love talking to Chris. He's one of my favorite people. And a guy I don't see enough, but we had a great talk, so I hope you enjoy this.
Bryan Callen, this is his intro song. Bryan Callen, it's one hell of an intro song. His comedy is marvelous. He's a genius in world politics.
All right.
Glad I added
like
that.
it.
Huh?
Yeah, we got Chris Ryan, Dr. Chris Ryan
Hey,
in the house.
Dr. First.
Author of Civilized Death, author of Sex at Dawn. I love talking to you, and I haven't seen you in a long time, my friend. You're wearing your hiking boots. You've got your orange pants on.
These are my guru. I don't know if these are visible.
Yeah. You're ready.
Yeah, these are my guru sex cult leader pants.
That's right.
Figure once we get the cult going, all the men will have orange pants.
You're still working on the cult.
God, it's a lifelong project, you know?
What have you been thinking
Recruitment.
about? Yeah, recruitment.
Recruitment.
It's a bitch. A lot of people have tried.
Yeah.
Usually you get in trouble with it at the end of the day.
I figure I want to get in trouble at the beginning of the day. Just get that out of the way.
Well, you're very honest about it.
Like when you call it a sex cult from the get-go,
Yeah.
it's like, how are you going to Me Too me?
That's exactly
like,
right.
I wrote a book about sex, and I claim I'm a sex cult guru. So
I always say that, guys, it's creepy when a guy acts like he's something else. So
Right.
if you're not engaging, if you're not entering the equation fully transparent,
right.
then then that's when it gets weird, right? So you're in the friend zone, then you make a move. People are like, wait a minute, what are you doing?
Wait.
Like you were acting like a sweet guy, but at the end of the day, it was all a facade.
Right. Yeah, my uncle Dan, who is like the smoothest dude ever, just women just gravitate to him. And he's like 80 years old. He's missing most of his teeth. He can't lift his right arm above his shoulder because he had a motorcycle accident. He's wrecked several float planes that he was flying.
Sounds like a grandpa I'd like to fuck.
I mean, yeah, he's awesome. But his thing, that's his advice. I had him on my podcast, and he was like, I said, what do you say to young men? He's like, first of all, you see a woman across the room you want to meet, don't think about it. Just walk, just start walking. Just walk over there before you have time to get creepy and weird. Hi. Hold out your hand. And he says, I walk up to a woman, I hold out my hand, I say, hi, I'm Dan Carr. You look like someone I'd like to meet. And that's it.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Not that she's going to say, oh, and this is my husband, Spike. And you're like, hey, Spike, good to meet you too. And that's it.
Right.
No fucking bullshit, no story, no pickup line. And so now I've got several friends who when they see a woman who's attractive, they'll just walk up to her and say, hi, I'm Dan Carr, and you look like someone I'd like
Yeah. Well, there's a difference, though. When you're younger, there's this, I don't think men are taught that you are going to have to contend with whether or not you can connect with this person or not. And sexual connection is very important. But you spend a lot of your time not having sex in a relationship.
Right.
So you are going to come to the realization, the hard math is going to happen. It's going to come down to, I don't connect with this person. We just miss, or we all the way miss. And I wish I'd known that in the first 10 minutes, but I had to find out about that 6 years later, or a year later, or 20 years later, right? After we have kids and everything. So that's where, how do you avoid that?
Yeah, well, I think young men in particular are blinded by testosterone. And so anything you can do to see through the haze of testosterone is going to be very helpful. And, I think that because we live in a society that's extremely repressive sexually, even though we think we don't, right? Because sex is used to sell stuff and to manipulate us in all sorts of ways. So we're sort of surrounded by sexual innuendo, But it's like Instagram, right? Like you got all these really hot women trying to get your attention, but they can't show their nipples and they can't show this. So it's like at the same time it's titillating and drawing your attention. It's not really sexually relaxed or liberated at all.
No.
As opposed to Spain, where I lived for 20 years, topless bathing is normal. It's just normal.
Yeah.
So breasts don't hold this like crazy appeal because it's just a body,
Yeah, there's that. That's right, because it keeps men in an adolescent stage.
Exactly. So we're blinded. So we're more susceptible to the advertising techniques, using the hot woman to sell the truck and all that kind of crap. So I think not just for sex, but for every aspect of life, I think the first question that young people need to ask is like, what's the premise? Challenge the premise, right? The way the situation is framed limits your options. So you need to question the premise and reframe it yourself. So for example, should I marry this woman or that woman? Well, maybe you don't need to marry anyone, right? Or, maybe you could have a relationship with both of them. Maybe they're bisexual and they're really good friends and they want to be together, but they want a man involved. Like there are way more, believe me, there are way more configurations than what's on the menu. Order off the menu.
That sounds like just starting with a very broad and honest panoramic of what's possible.
Right. Which you get through travel, through reading, through experience, like Joseph Campbell, you probably know him, right? The hero of the thousand faces, power of myth, awesome mythologist. I remember he wrote in one of his books about detribalization, which is an essential phase of maturation. And when you realize like, oh, I'm in a tribe. Everyone's in a tribe. It's like when you realize I have an accent. To you, I have an accent, right?
Right.
And because you sort of the primary phase of maturation is you think everyone else is weird and you're normal, right? Yes. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, it's like relativity or something. It's like, no, everything is weird from different perspectives, including me and my culture and my family and my background.
That's hugely important,
right?
Because you internalize a narrative. And as you get older, I think it comes down to being something like responsive to evidence and being able to see evidence without your confirmation bias.
Right. And see your own blind spots.
Oh my God.
How hard is that? That's the struggle.
It's less hard when you expose yourself to people who have different points of view. One of the things I'm trying to do with this podcast coming up is I'm going to start, I really want to talk to people that I disagree with, or at least people.
You're giving me liquid death to drink here? Is this like melted down?
It's such
people?
A funny.
What am I
such
drinking?
A funny ad campaign. They're not a sponsor, but their ad campaign is that water kills a lot of people. People don't realize that, and it does.
So I'm going to drown in
this.
this.
It's so funny. They have this commercial about liquid death, and it's just water.
Anyway, and, I interrupted you. You're talking about what you're trying to do with the podcast.
Well, I want to start turning this. I want to start debating issues. I want people on different sides of the issues, and rather than call it a debate, I'd rather call it a discussion, so we can take ideas, put them on the table, and see how they fit together. You and I should do something where we find somebody who a traditionalist like Jordan Peterson who believes in monogamy and believes in
arm wrestle him
and just have a talk about the difference between polygamy, monogamy, or just structuring a society that puts less pressure on the idea of monogamy, because I think as liberated, quote unquote, as we've become with the LGBTQ plus community and all that stuff, you are still, you still better be a sexual Puritan. You still better be very monogamous. You still better be very careful about it. Sex has never been more dangerous. It's never been more dangerous.
Can we cut out that whole thing about me running a sex cult?
Sure. Yeah.
Now that you mention it. I'm kidding.
Now that you mention it.
I was just kidding about the sex cult.
We can edit it out.
Nah,
no, that'll be the highlight reel. But I wonder, like, I just think, do you think human beings have, though, a predilection or a almost nostalgia for monogamy? Is that part of our mythology or part of our biology, do you think? Because you've studied this. In other words, most societies would probably tell you that monogamy is the way to go. Now, I think the difference is in Europe, from my experience, when men and women are courting each other, they're doing it in groups. The girls and guys are all friends. Everybody's just hanging out. There's no pressure. We're all hanging out.
Right.
And if something happens, it happens. But by that time, you guys have been hanging out and you're friends and everything's interlocked. There's a ritual, and there is a process by which you meet people. It's not, somebody was talking about dating and dating apps. And the problem with dating apps is that 80% of the men are left out. They get swiped the other way. And only 20% or 5% of the men get all the likes. So it's 5% of the men who are getting 100% of the female attention. And that just throws everything off. And the rest of the guys have to, rely on porn and sex for sale if they can even afford it.
Get super into Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. I mean, what else do you have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or incels or Proud Boys or NoFap fucking activists or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Your question was monogamy, nostalgia. I think the first thing that we need to do when we're talking about monogamy is distinguish between sexual monogamy and social monogamy, right? Like even in the animal kingdom, like swans, penguins, all sorts of animals are socially monogamous, meaning there seems to be a breeding pair who cooperate in raising the young together, either lifelong or one breeding season, whatever, differs by species. But often when you do DNA tests on those chicks, they are not related to the apparent father.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Swans, penguins. Yeah. I did this whole thing about March of the Penguins and Sex at Dawn. Turns out those emperor penguins, they only mate for one season. Wow. And they live 30 years. So they've got 25 sexual partners in the lifetime, and yet they're held up as a paragon of monogamy, right?
His new book, Feathered Sluts, hitting shelves.
Well, I did use the term penguin poontang in Sex at Dawn.
Penguin poon.
Because there was like, this biologist who was studying them found all sorts of interesting relationships, like one female with two males who were assisting her in raising the young and all that and bringing pebbles to help her build her nest. And it was a menage a trois,
Wow.
Yeah.
Do women and men, but men cheat more than women, don't they?
Again, cheat. What do we mean? Are we talking? Some people think if you watch porn, that's cheating.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
Some people think if you think of another person while you're having sex with your partner, that's cheating.
Right.
The language makes it really complicated to talk about these things. And, I think there's a section in Sex at Dawn about the confusion that comes about because anthropologists look, they're living with a hunter-gatherer group in the Amazon or something, and they see that, this girl who had her hammock hanging next to her mother's hammock in this big communal, hut, now has her hammock hanging next to that man's. And they say, well, they're married. Okay, that's our term for a male-female partnership, or now
a deal,
more than
right? A contract?
But there's no contract. There's in that society, there's no assumption of permanence. There's no assumption that he's going to help her raise children. There's no property exchange. There's no family. All this stuff that's part of the marriage package for us, it doesn't pertain to this society. And so to call that married is ridiculous. And then they have a fight and she puts her hammock back next to her mother's and they go, oh, no, she's divorced. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. We do have that anyway in this country. I mean, the divorce rate is something like 50%, right?
Yeah.
So that goes back to what I was saying. You probably have the same issues with connection. The biggest issue is probably the fact that we have sort of internalized this story where the one person you decide to shack up with has to fulfill all the needs.
Right.
All your needs. Your sexual needs, your friendship needs, your spiritual needs, and that is putting all the pressure on one person, and they can't do that.
Right. So that's something I wanted to say in response to your earlier question about, do we yearn for monogamy? I think we need to remember that most of us are raised by two or one parent, right? So from a very young age, we've got this idea ingrained in us that everything comes from one or maybe two sources, right? All the love, all the protection, what you were just saying, everything comes from one, maybe two people, depending. And so it's sort of predictable that as adults, we would project that same image into our romantic relationships, right? Whereas hunter-gatherers, as we demonstrated in Sex at Dawn, are raised by all the adults. Like, you know who your biological mother is, but other women will breastfeed a baby. You know, no problem. Baby's crying, pick it up, breastfeed. Why not? Baby falls down, whatever adult is near the baby, pick, hey, you okay? You're fine. Yeah. So you've got all these adults, all these different sources of love and protection and caring and education.
It becomes harder though as the tribe gets exponentially larger.
Well, this is the thing. Hunter-gatherer groups have a natural size limit.
Yes.
And then they split off into
That's why
others.
they're hunter-gatherers. There's a limit to how much they can hunt.
But the point is that psychology, that pattern is ingrained in the children. So it makes sense that the children would say, no, I get everything from everywhere.
The problem with comparing hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural societies, which is what we live in now, is you have to bring in the fact that you've got pathogens now. Disease played a big factor in monogamy, and the list goes on. But so that what happens is the way I look at it, the way I negotiate things is I just go, okay, I'm married. I love my wife. I want her to be happy. The pledge I try to make to myself is I'm never going to try to control your behavior. I am not going to try to control what your impulses are. I'm certainly not going to try to get in your head and control your fantasy life. And I'm not going to resent you for your past. I'm not going to resent you for what you'd like to do sometimes. Guess what? You might get bored of me sometimes or all the time. I don't know. But I think men get into trouble when they try to be everything to a woman, and you see a lot of relationships where both parties are playing a character. You have the biggest dick in the world. You're all I need. I can't even think about other guys. I've never looked at whatever. If you like that, I don't buy it. And men do the same thing. And then all you can do is tell your friends how you really feel. Right. And you're living with this person. Yeah. And you can't even fucking be honest.
Well, people come to me for relationship advice a lot, which is weird. Yeah. If you're coming to me, you're looking for a certain perspective.
No, but you've tackled this, and you've written a couple of great books on the idea that Sex at Dawn was kind of a groundbreaker, and I don't think it's a mistake that it was and continues to be that popular because it was so honest. It was so fucking, and it was also so, I don't know, when I read it, I remember thinking it's kind of ballsy because the amount of pushback people will give you, and the pushback is probably something like, I don't like this. I don't know why, but it doesn't feel right. And that's to be honored. But you said, I don't care. This is how I live my life.
Well, and that's why I wanted to write that book, because I felt that a lot of people were suffering unnecessarily. Yeah. When I started to see the science, and I knew people were going to get offended, I knew it was going to cause a problem precisely because of what you were saying. I think that, and through no fault of their own, largely, people enter into relationships under false pretenses, right? You got the biggest dick in the world. You're the greatest guy. Oh, you're the best cook. Okay, that's beautiful. That's great. You feel really good at the beginning, but it's bullshit. And so the relationship often never gets to a point where you are dealing with each other in true transparency, and you're keeping all your secrets. She's keeping her secrets. And as you say, you end up being more honest with your friends or with a sex worker or whatever than you are with this person you're sharing your life with.
By the way, when you say honest, what you're really talking about is intimacy.
Yeah, that's it. So you share. So then you mistake the fact that you can be intimate with your secretary who you're having sex with, or whatever it is, the cliche situation. You can be more intimate with her than you are with your partner. Then you say, oh, I should be with her. No, it's not that you're more compatible with her. It's that because of the way you set up your relationship, you're not allowing yourselves to be honest with each other. Right. And so you can't. So when she says, I love you, you're like, yeah, you love the version of me that I've let you see. You don't really know me.
You don't know me.
You don't know what.
Yeah, that's why guys hide their phones, or there's all that stuff that goes on.
So I think, when we talk about monogamy and defining monogamy and what's right and what's wrong and all that, what I say in Sex at Dawn, what Casilda and I say is like, look, we're not advocating anything. We're not advocating you should be swingers or you should do this or you should do that. All we're saying is, if you want true intimacy, you need to be honest. Yeah. You need to be honest. Yes. And we're trying to give you space to be honest by saying, look, the fact that you want to have sex with someone else other than your partner is not because your marriage is fucked up. It's not because you're a bad person. It's not because you're a bad person. You're not sick. She's not sick. It's because you're Homo sapiens. Start there, right? You're Homo sapiens. Just like you want to eat meat. You're Homo sapiens. We evolved eating meat. That's the way it is, okay? Now, you want to be a vegetarian? Great, be a vegetarian. But understand that it's going to be a challenge.
Because you're going to like bacon.
Because you're going to smell that bacon and it's going to be like, you're going to get a hard on, man. And so if you start with that understanding, I think it's much easier to maintain an honest monogamous connection with someone if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because you don't have all that repression and anxiety being generated by your bullshit.
That's right. And I think I think you have to arrive at your own reasons for monogamy if you're going to be monogamous, right? Like, so it's like,
it has to be a decision.
Punishment doesn't change behavior. It might repress your behavior.
Right.
But I think that you have to come to the conclusion that my life is better over here than it is over here. Sure. Now, whatever over here is going to be your own thing to figure out. And you can make the argument, then you can get into the argument of the overall body of thought or philosophy would suggest that maybe some form of self-restriction as a human being on your impulses, on your quest for sensation, eating too much, fucking too much. All of those things come with trappings. All of those things come with their own chains. All of those things come with their own liabilities and blind spots themselves. And that's a different subject, right? But starting out, I love that idea of starting out with the idea that we are Homo sapiens. So let's just, yes, spiritual. Yes, there's another side, but don't ignore. It's like Carl Jung kind of like warned, don't ignore the shadow. You ignore your shadow, motherfucker, and you leave him at the door. You're going to come in with nothing but your ego. Yeah. You're gonna come in with, hey, I'm all light. Cool, because that doesn't exist. Right. And the minute you do that, you are going to be living a big lie. And I have seen at 56, I've seen a lot of people build an edifice, build an absolute empire on a false narrative.
Yeah.
You know, there's an exception to that. I was just with him, Joe Rogan. Joe is so just brutally honest with himself and those around him. Yeah. And when I say brutally, I mean it's so refreshing and it's the only way to go. Yeah. Because I think he figured out a long time ago, he started looking around and he saw people who had built this whole edifice. And we had to talk about this, about how you just never get away with it. It's going to come crumbling down. It will crumble. It will. And you better be aware of your own ignorance and the fact that you're, like you said, it's fascinating when you enter this relationship, a marriage, and it comes with all its pressures, and you're pretending to be one thing and you're something else. You're not allowed to show your partner your shadow. You're not allowed to show your partner even your past.
Right. Because
they'll look at you differently because you started the relationship on a goddamn lie.
It becomes shadow, right? 100%. Like your past doesn't need to be shadow, right? Your past is just your past, but it becomes shadow because your partner doesn't want to hear about it. Your partner can't deal with it, or you've decided you don't want to share because you don't want to know her past or whatever it is. And now it's a secret you need to keep. It never needed to be a secret, right? No. It never, but you need, I mean, I think a lot of men that I talk to are like, I want to be non-monogamous, but not her, she's, and it's like the strength required is you need to grant whatever it is you want to be granted, right? Whatever freedom, whatever respect, whatever subtlety and nuance that you deserve, well, so does your partner. And that doesn't mean that men and women want the same things or behave the same way in different, contexts. It's like a, separate but equal kind of thing. It's like we're different, but we need to respect each other to the same depth that we demand. We need to offer the same.
What about people who come to you and say, I love my partner, I love her so much, I love him so much, but I think I'm addicted to, this other behavior. I'm addicted to, I can't say no. A lot of men are like this. I love my wife, I love my kids, I love my whole life, but I can't stop banging other chicks, and they're my girlfriend or their wife or whatever. What do you say to those people? And what is that addiction?
I think for me, addiction is, it doesn't matter what the object of the addiction is, whether it's gambling or sex or alcohol or, whatever it is. It's a hole that you're trying to fill with something, or it's a pain that you're trying to distract yourself from. And sex is one way of distracting yourself from it. So what I say to those people is, you're not going to solve the problem by finding some way of cutting yourself off from the thing that you use to,
punishment.
It's not going to work. It'll never work. It'll just get hard. Even if you cut it off for a few months, then the hunger gets deeper and deeper and stronger because you're not addressing the issue.
You got to find a way, right, to enjoy monogamy or enjoy this honesty more than you do this other thing.
Well, or you need to find a way to address the underlying issue, right? Which is therapy, psychedelics, travel, honest conversation with friends. I mean, there are lots of ways that you can do it. But the thing is, you need to find what it is you're distracting yourself from. You need to face that.
That's interesting.
And I think with a lot of men, and myself included, we have been traumatized by sexual frustration as teenagers, where you're 14 years old. There is not a cool 14-year-old in the world. I don't care. And the least cool 14-year-olds are the ones who think they're cool, right? Because they don't even know that they're not cool.
14 is such an interesting age.
But you're horny as a monkey. You're crazy about, your body is just screaming. And you're not going to get laid, for years probably. And you're in a position where you're so pathetic.
And you'll see a woman in a bikini at a pool, and it's like, and she's like a 10, and it's, I remember seeing that. She was 16 and I was 14 in Maryland. I never forgot it. And she was in a white bikini, and she looked like Jessica Rabbit, and she pulled her hair back. Oh. And I was 14.
Oh, and the water's dripping off her body.
I had never seen anything like it. I didn't know what to do with myself. I was looking around. Yeah. My buddy Carl was like, "You all right?" I go, who is she? Like, who gets to be there?
Yeah.
I've never forgotten it. I mean, I'm 56. Yeah. I've never forgotten it. You're 14-year-old boy.
Power.
It's beyond power.
And she doesn't even know she's got the power. She's just hanging out. She's not even thinking about sex.
Double D tits, and she was like, she was a full-grown woman, and I was 14, and I was a fucking stick boy.
Dude, last night, my mother, we were watching the Super Bowl, and my mother said, "Do you remember the Japanese girl who stayed with us when you were 14?" And she was a high school exchange student. She stayed with us for a month. Oh. And I said, "You mean Tomoko Matsuyuki?" Oh, yeah.
Oh, I remember
Tomoko Matsuyuki.
I've never stopped thinking about her.
I remember Tomoko Matsuyuki every fucking day, man. Yeah. So anyway, I think that and I'm not blaming anyone.
We're traumatized.
We're traumatized.
Yeah.
And so it's like someone who grows up dirt poor will never have enough money.
Yeah.
If you're really frustrated, you suffer that frustration in those years, you never get enough pussy. You're like, they're always hungry no matter. It's like erotic obesity or something. You just 100%. Can't get enough. So I think that happens with prestige, if you're low status as a kid.
Poverty's a great one. Poverty,
fame, money, like all these things.
Well, it's the humiliation, right?
Yeah, I think it creates a misunderstanding that if I only had this, I'd be happy, right? And you'd never outgrow it. a lot of us never outgrow it. And so you end up in this constant striving for more money, more fame, more power, more status, more women, more this. And, you're just a rat on a wheel at that point.
I see a difference between men who grew up with sisters. Like a lot of men who grew up with a lot of sisters.
Older sisters, especially, yeah.
The apparition loses some of its sheen.
And also you understand women better.
What's that?
You understand women better. Because you've met your sister's friends and you know what she's like before the date.
And the curtain has been pulled back, like you say. Oh, they're just like
they're just people.
They're people.
Yeah.
And also you get a better sense. You're right. You probably see them cry. You see the damage men do to them.
Yeah.
The boyfriend breaks up with them. You get a sense. I think when you are a boy, and you don't have that, women you're separated from women.
Yeah.
And then you get to college and they're just a different species. They're just a different creature. You don't know how their brain works. I never was taught how a woman thinks, and there are differences. My girlfriend fell asleep when we were watching Raging Bull, and I found it inexcusable. I was like, how would you fall asleep? How would you ever fall asleep during the greatest movie of all time? I was like, oh, I have nothing. I can't date you.
Were you awake through Sex in the City?
I sure wasn't. In fact, I did an episode of that. In fact, I was with my girlfriend.
You fell asleep on camera.
I was with my girlfriend. I was watching my mother and my girlfriend watch it. My mother's a very intelligent woman, and they were riveted. And they were riveted on. And these women were sitting at the table at the restaurant talking. They were just talking about a guy.
Yeah.
And they were like this. They were riveted, and they were looking at what they were wearing. And they were commenting, my mother, intelligent woman, educated woman, and my girlfriend, smart woman and sort of self-made, and they were talking. And I was probably 32. And I didn't mean to do this, but I was watching this and I couldn't understand what the fuck they were watching. It was so appalling to me. You know what I said? Under my breath, I didn't mean it. I went, women are so stupid.
Oh,
I didn't mean it. I just said it. But I was a young man who didn't understand. And my girl heard it, and she turned and she goes, did you say women are really stupid? Really? Says the guy who watches football and debates who the best basketball player would ever be on your all-time team, or the guy who is obsessed with UFC, watching guys in their underwear fight, and who actually takes jiu-jitsu at 33, where you go and roll around with other guys in case you get in a fight on the street and the fight goes to the ground.
Yeah.
And she just tore me apart.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, I'm a much bigger idiot.
Good.
I'm preparing. I don't have an ability to hunt and fight, right? So my caveman is expressing itself in its own simulation.
Right.
And we're all a slave to a degree to our biology and our evolution. Or whatever. But I just didn't understand. I wasn't given that. I was taught to be ashamed of emotion. I was taught to be ashamed of my own sexuality in a way, like that, my desire, all that stuff that's really interesting though to say that you're traumatized.
Is your work, I often think of you and I see your things on Instagram and all that, and you seem, to me, you're like, a lot of your approach to comedy is the macho dude making fun of macho dudes.
Yes.
Yes,
because I don't, because
are you atoning for that, for that moment?
Well,
or that impulse?
I've always known a couple things. One, I'm not the man I want to be, which is I'm not a tough guy. I'm not a commando. I'm not a Spartan.
And why do you want to be that?
That's a larger question. It might have something to do with my father was more like that.
Right.
My father was a big man, a Marine, not temperature sensitive, not food sensitive, just a gruff, large bull of a man.
Right.
And he was, if he was a lion, I was a house cat. I'm finicky eater.
Do you have brothers?
I don't.
Okay.
But so maybe that was something like that.
Right.
I don't know if that's the answer though, because I had some success as an athlete. I was fairly athletic. I mean,
right.
I was, pretty good wrestler, all that stuff. But I put myself in those situations. But should have been a dancer.
Right.
Shouldn't have been a wrestler. Should have been a dancer.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You got the moves. I've seen you.
Yeah, I have a beautiful. I'm very to this day.
And your ass is just astounding.
I got a couple of cantaloupes in there, and it's all natural, bro.
Oh,
but
you haven't had implants?
And high insertion calves.
What do you insert them in?
I'm glad you asked. I'm built like a fucking frog from the waist down. But
I'm more of a toad.
I know. I've taken you in, but you got some big Germanic stock to you. You're just you're a big heavy kid.
More Irish.
Yeah, strong.
Yeah.
But may I continue?
Oh, please, please.
No, but I think that what were we talking about? What
your
was I?
calves and your ass.
No, I was talking
dancing.
about
why you have this idea of wanting to be a tough Navy SEAL motherfucker.
No, you were saying I was saying the reason I make fun of macho guys, a macho guy making fun of macho guys, is I think probably I put myself in enough situations, whether it was sports or whatever, to realize that I don't care how tough you are, you're flesh and bone, and you ever meet these high level operators, these SEAL team guys, they're never macho because they're very aware of how easy it is to die.
Right.
And I don't care how much you can bench and everything else. Small bullet can take you down just as fast as it does anybody else. So maybe I have a sense that I don't care who you are. It's really easy to hurt another human being. So whatever you think, you're always vulnerable. And I always was obsessed with the notion of courage and masculinity. And then I realized that I don't know how to define those two. And I even wonder if there's such a thing. I really do. Because when you say you're a man, I think of, well, I'm courageous. I've got my emotions under control. I have a lot of self-control. I can look death in the face. Yeah, I know. Okay, as long as you understand the waters you're navigating, as long as you know where you're going. I throw you in the middle of the Zambezi River with fucking Nile crocodiles, you're going to be screaming and begging to get back on the boat. So, courage is compartmentalized. Some people can overcome that, I guess, and we admire the fact that they jump on a grenade and all that. There's no doubt. But I don't... the idea of courage might be something like, I'm terrified, but I assume the position anyway.
That's it. It's not fearlessness.
No.
It's doing it despite the fear.
Yes. Okay.
And you know who faces death every day?
Who?
Nurses.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is that you can be a woman and have all of those things far more than a man. Right. So it's like,
would you have a fucking baby if you could? Would you squirt out a human being out of your...
No. I'd be terrified.
Forget about it.
So that's what I mean. Is like you get older and you see, you get just you start to realize that so much of what you've built your life around is on this sort of glass edifice. They always come. When the podcast gets too good, they go, guys, you guys are
Send in a SWAT team.
You guys are hitting areas most people fear to tread.
That.
We got to stop this because you're challenging monogamy, etc.
And masculinity.
That'll
piss the cops off.
That's the big one.
Do not do that.
That's the big one.
Yes, officer, but I don't think you're really masculine. I think your nurse wife is more masculine than you.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember coming to the realization that if masculinity is defined as doing what you need to do despite the consequences, who's more masculine than gay guys? My family might kick me out. I probably get beat up a lot walking down the street. Bother nobody.
Well, you and I are old enough to remember when that was the case for gay people.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Well,
but you and I...
fucking Texas.
Well,
I don't want to be in Plano,
that.
Texas wearing a purple scarf now.
Well, maybe, but I think, but I certainly think you and I grew up when it was actually dangerous to be gay. I always say this. It was dangerous.
And that's even without counting AIDS, right?
That's right.
I mean, that's
right.
Yeah, but I mean, do what you be. It gets back to the transparency we're talking about in marriage and, and friendships and all that. It's like, being real is hard. Yeah. There's nothing that requires more courage than being fucking real. And man, coming out, someone raised as a Catholic, like Dan Savage tells that story about, realizing at 16, 17 or whatever, and telling his mother, who was a really believing Catholic, and she called the priest to the house, and Dan's upstairs in his room, and his mom and the priest are sitting on the porch swing talking, and she says, Father, Dan came to me and he said he loves men and I don't know what to do and it's a sin and God won't love him and all this. And the priest said, I've never told anyone this, but I love men as well. And I admire Dan for having the courage to acknowledge
Instead
that.
of going into the priesthood.
Yeah, right. Instead of like trying to cut your dick off, which, as you said, doesn't fucking work. So then you end up
You meet another priest who's in the same thing, and you guys
altar
are,
boys.
or an altar boy. That's
You
right.
know, that's why in the darkness of repression, abuse flourishes. So if we want to make the world a safer, better place, the first thing we need to do is just be honest. Like in this country, we're going to get into some real deep waters here. If you tell a therapist that you're sexually attracted to kids, the therapist has to turn you in.
I was just talking about this.
Fuck that.
I was just talking about that. Like
You're asking for help to not hurt someone.
Yeah.
And they need to, you can't really legally ask for psychological
That's
help.
right. It goes
to
back.
not hurt
There was this
children.
guy who was making like sex dolls that were children. And it was like, the guy was like, yeah, I'd rather them fuck. This is awful, but I'd rather them do this than with a real child. You know? And I think you're right. That's the fascinating and dicey conversation around pedophilia. The idea is we all agree. Let's all agree on one thing. I got 3 kids. It's the ultimate evil. Like the only thing that'll get me to cut your fucking head off is if you do that to my kid. I'm going to do the jail time, right? God forbid. God for fucking bid. But we want to stop it, right? We want to make it less so. There are pedophiles out there that have this crazy compulsion. They think it might be something neurological. Maybe there's something in your fucking brain, right? Whatever it is.
Virtually all of them were abused as kids.
Whatever the case, I don't know. But I haven't gotten into the literature of it, but we know that they exist, and we know it's a compulsion, and we know that a lot of them would rather not have this sickness.
Yeah.
So is there anywhere for them to go because you're right, if you go to a therapist, they are legally obligated to go to the police, and now you go to jail. So what do? Voluntary castration, suicide? Okay. But is there another thing?
Yeah. And also, a lot of sexologists and psychologists have come to the conclusion that sexual attraction to prepubescent children is a sexual orientation. So now we're talking about it's as ingrained in someone as being gay or being straight.
No, that's I'm willing to accept that. Now, though, the problem is that that's not something that we can have just running around unchecked. So then the question is, you've got a couple of choices. Imprisonment of some kind, whether it's in a hospital, into a sex prison, into whatever it might be. Voluntary castration, I don't know if that would work. Or you just shine all the light on it. You figure out a way to say, I think as science starts to make that an irrefutable fact, which is this person has this affliction. It is beyond their control. Now, you don't want that guy around your children. I understand. But what do we do with somebody who has schizophrenia? What do we do with somebody who has whatever it might be? We get them help.
Well, and also you say it's beyond their control. I think there's a line, I forget who it was, Wittgenstein or Nietzsche, or some German philosopher said, we can do what we want, but we can't want what we want.
That's interesting.
Right? So we can't choose our desires or our appetites. We can choose our response to those desires and appetites,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So
you're right. Like, no, I don't care what you're in whatever you got to do, you can never do that.
Right. And so a lot of people who do seek help, like in Canada, it's legal. You go to the therapist, you say, I have these impulses, and the therapist is, okay, I'm going to help you deal with those impulses, right? So that you never do that thing that you have this desire.
Well, what if being a serial killer like a Dexter is the same thing? It's the same issue.
And then look what happened. The origin story of Dexter was his parents being killed and him.
His dad was like, you're into her.
Dexter. I wrote a chapter in a book about Dexter actually, and the argument I made was that Dexter is a superhero. He's got the same origin story as Superman.
Yeah.
The parents killed at a young age, and he finds out later, and that he sort of incorporates. He gets power from his trauma, which a lot of us do. It's an interesting.
It's a dicey
motif.
thing to even talk about, but the only way you kind of get to solving this problem, again, you have to keep going back to, hold on, I know you want to kill them. You want to kill all pedophiles. I understand. I'm right with you. I get it. Me too. Yeah. I understand. But we also want to make sure this doesn't happen. We want to reduce the number of children that have this experience to 0, right? We all agree with that? Yes? Okay. Let's get ruthless about how we do that. Yeah. Let's get ruthless about it. If that means we have to create a pathway for these people to actually seek and get help without going to jail or without having the fear of having their entire lives ruined, then let's have that conversation.
What's harm reduction, right? It's like how Holland deals with drugs and prostitution and what Portugal's been 100%. Doing. I think it's a question of sort of cultural maturity, right? Because an immature culture, and America is definitely an immature culture. This country is like a country run by teenage boys. When it sees something that makes it uncomfortable, it just denies it. Make it go away, throw it in prison, kill it, wipe it. And a mature culture says, okay, this makes us uncomfortable. How do we minimize it? What is the rational approach to this, right? What's the harm reduction approach to this? So that's what we were talking about earlier with sex addiction or any other kind of addiction. What I am saying is you need to address the underlying cause of this. Yeah. So, on a cultural level, cocaine is a big issue. So what's America do? Well, we're going to fly down to Colombia and drop chemicals on the jungle and, wipe it out. And as opposed to, why are so many people taking cocaine in America?
Let's do that.
Is life so bad that you need to get coked up to go to work? Like maybe there's a problem with the way this culture is configured. I remember
after 9/11, there was this big movement to make buildings resistant to planes crashing into them. I was like, that's not how I do it.
A friend of mine,
I think there might be a better way to actually get to the root cause of this. Like, let's figure something else out.
I think I heard this story years ago. I was in India, and I always think of this. So it's this story about like a Maharaja, a very rich guy, the ruler of the kingdom, lives inside this palace, and in the palace everything's carpeted, and he walks around barefoot, and it's wonderful. And one day he decides he's going to go out and tour some of the lands and see how people are living. And he goes out with his retinue, and he's walking around. And he steps on a sharp stone, and wow! So he goes back and he gets all his engineers, and he says, "There's sharp stones out there in the world. We need that can't be. So you need to cover the entire kingdom in leather, and to protect people's feet." And so these engineers do the calculation, and they're like, there's not enough leather in the world to cover the entire. And what are we going to do though? Because if we can't tell him no, can't say no to the king, right? So someone comes up with the idea, wait a minute, we could just cover everyone's feet with leather. Right? So I always think about that in these kind of conversations, because it's like, do we eliminate the existence of the thing that makes us uncomfortable? Or do we learn to deal with the thing?
Have to learn how to
and
deal
recognize we're never going to eliminate it.
I went and bought a gun, and the guy said, yeah, but I got kids, and I want to make sure I have a safe, and I want to make sure that it has a safety. And he goes, the safety is never as good as education. Tell your kids, teach your kids about guns.
Right.
Let them shoot guns. Right. Educate them on the lethality of a gun, and give them the respect to feel what it feels like when you shoot it. All of that. And I was like, damn, total exposure makes total sense.
Right.
Right. To an extent. I mean, but
it's the same thing with sex, right? You don't tell you, if we taught kids to drive the same way we teach them about sex, it would be like, oh, you're 16. Well, here are the keys. Try not to kill anyone. And don't talk to me about it. It makes me really uncomfortable.
Right. Right.
Like, oh, good luck with that. Surprisingly, that doesn't work very well.
Yeah, there's actually zero conversation for men and for boys and girls on first of all, and this has become even more taboo as the equality movement becomes extreme with no nuance. But boys and girls are never taught that that's the opposite sex over there thinks differently and may have different needs than you do. I mean, it has been exposed to a different set of circumstances, that estrogen and testosterone have different effects on the brain. That estrogen and testosterone have different effects on interests. And that's by design maybe, and a good thing. But as long as you understand that, but we're never taught any of that. Boys go out into the female world expecting to find a creature that thinks exactly like them. And when that creature does not, they go, oh, this person's crazy. She's crazy. Chicks are crazy. Right. It's like, no, dude, you might be crazy, or you just aren't understanding. You guys don't even know how to talk about what you need. You guys don't even know how to deal with that.
And that way of thinking not only leads to incomprehension like you're talking about, but I think it also leads to a lot of misunderstanding where, men think women are thinking like men. So men do things to impress women based upon the assumption, like, these are the things that impress my buddies, so it must impress her. And instead he ends up looking ridiculous to her because she's impressed by something totally different. I mean, no offense to our mutual friends, but pumping a lot of iron in the gym doesn't really impress most women.
That's what's fascinating.
You're impressing your dude buddies, but women are like,
yeah, I'll
why do you do that?
watch a dating show with my wife, one of these, like, I don't know, Love Island. And I'll be like, that guy's a stud, that's the guy. And she'll go, who? Yeah. And I'm like, the guy with the muscles. And then she goes, that guy's not attractive. It's the other guy.
And you're like, I spent my whole life trying to be that guy.
And then she'll say something like, he's got beautiful eyes and I like his smile. I'm like, but he's a pussy. Like, don't you want the fucking guy that can wrestle a bull to the ground? She's like, ew, he looks oily or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, I want to look like that guy. I want to be that guy,
And you look at, same thing with women. You look at like women's fashion magazines or whatever. It's like, oh, that's all like, you're going to look at, you want to look at hot women. Are you going to look at a Vogue or a Penthouse?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm dating myself. Most people.
Penthouse.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's exactly right. That's, I always say that I'll look at a guy, I'm like, you love that guy. And she's like, no, Brian, you're attracted to that guy. That's your type. That's not my type. I'm like, fuck. Yeah, you're right. A little gay.
Yeah, but I mean that can be a source of relief, for young men. It's like you don't need to be rich. You don't need to have giant biceps. You don't need to have high insertion calves, although I'm sure it helps. It helps.
It does help, dude. It does help.
You need to be funny. You need to be kind. You need to be compassionate.
And understanding.
Like that's what actually turns most women on. I'm not saying there aren't women who are like, oh, like, muscles. Okay, fine. You get your muscles. But most interesting women, if you're an interesting guy, you don't need to do all that shit. Just work on your mind. Be a good person.
Well, my buddy used to always say, in New York when we were young men, he goes, if you like women, you're spending all this time in a gym, why don't you get in a dance class?
Right.
I was like, fuck, that's right. Spend your time getting really good at dance.
Yeah.
And be a great dancer.
And be around women.
Right.
Like, there are no women in the fucking gym.
A lot of guys
they don't want to talk to you.
Who are in the, but like if you really know how to salsa or samba or rumba or fucking swing, or just get in a class where you're dancing hip hop with, I mean, you're gonna have, things are gonna happen. Yeah. Which is why I'm a fucking great dancer, Chris. And why dance is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Where's my camera, Dylan?
I don't want to tell you.
Dylan, you have any questions for us? You're married.
Dylan and I were having a good chat before you showed up about all this stuff.
Dylan's become a very close friend.
Dylan was warming me up, I think.
Dylan, unfortunately, we work together, and Dylan is my producer. He's not that tech savvy, but the problem is that he's my friend now, and he's a big part of a couple of the shows. So it's I can never ever part ways with him.
Yeah.
So that's a huge liability.
He's like your Jamie.
He's funny and he's smart.
Yeah.
And he should probably be on camera with a mic, not being a producer.
You want me to take over production?
I'm just goading him right now because I like to insult him and then compliment him at the same time. It keeps him on his toes.
Confuse him.
You have any questions, Dylan? You've been married how long?
I've been with the same woman for 14 years. We've been married for 5.
And you're how old?
32.
Wow. And your wife is a smoke show.
She's very pretty, yes.
Yeah. She's from Venezuela?
She's Argentinian.
Argentina.
Yeah.
From Argentina.
He's looking at me like, you poor fuck. I mean, my God.
No.
Are you, I guess that's a question. Are you, is that a 5-alarm kind of situation? And we were talking about that she was raised Catholic. So with that, is that a 5? alarm kind of situation.
No, look, my parents got married. Well, they met when my dad was 17 or 18, I think, and my mom's 2 years younger. Mm-hmm. And they were married forever and only with each other. And they loved each other. They had a fantastic marriage. My dad died a few years ago. My mom's still alive. And zero regrets. And I have huge respect for what they did with their lives. And in fact, I don't think I would feel anywhere near as free to experiment in the ways that I have if they hadn't provided the kind of solid, loving family base that I grew up in.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a, a relationship there.
What were you going to say?
Well, am I off in kind of perceiving a little bit of a balk when I say Catholicism? Like, do you think that's a particularly...
Well, my parents were both Catholic as well.
Do you think it's a particularly damaging form of spiritual repression?
I think it depends how... I think...
You're allowed to confess.
In Spain...
Good point.
Spain is a Catholic country, right?
Yeah.
I lived there for 20 years. And the Spanish are far more chill about sex than Americans.
So is Italy, so is Brazil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think there are Catholicism itself, like the teachings of Catholicism, that Jesus was born from a virgin is going to give me a fucking break. We got to start with
Chris,
that,
Doctor.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff in Christianity that I think is very, at least as it's interpreted now.
Not scientifically valid. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, I was going to say it's like, it's repressive.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem. But I think that, as cultures and individuals grow, they learn to take the part that works and leave behind the part that doesn't. And so I don't think being raised as a Catholic is necessarily a death sentence for your sex life. I think.
I keep wondering about the future and what sex robots, are going to look like in 10 years.
They're already around, dude, and they're looking pretty good.
Yeah, and pretty soon you're going to have like these cyborgs that kind of like, are everything that you would want because it's like a Stepford wife, just cleaning your house. It's like, it comes with a vacuum and you can also have sex with it. That will be interesting because that's going to be a thing. There's going to be men that save all their money for a $50,000 robot that is as close to their girlfriend as, but I don't think that's going to solve the problem of human intimacy or connection at all. But Jesus.
Well, they can talk now. They can answer you. If you combine porn with Chat GPT or whatever that's called, you're
Jesus
pretty
Christ.
close already. And then virtual reality.
Yeah, you wonder, right? You wonder.
And fleshlights and, that whole thing. It's like, it's converging on the partner replacement technology.
Yeah, I guess so. Although it's still silicon and I don't know.
How much have our phones replaced our friendships, right?
Yeah.
You're sitting there across the
But it
table.
hasn't for me. That's why I wanted to do this podcast with you because I love hanging out with you, but I never see you. And I was like, it's such a great thing about podcasting is we get to sit and just talk.
It is kind of like a counterwave to the current of the culture.
Yeah, especially in person.
Yeah.
Where we can just sit and kind of shoot the shit and talk and,
Yeah, my podcast, like I've been doing Zooms, COVID, I finally gave in because I've been doing it for over 10 years.
Yeah. What is it called?
Tangentially Speaking.
I just want to make sure. It's a great podcast.
Thank you. Yeah. But it's kind of like at this point, I'm kind of like the whole Zoom thing. It's just
tough.
like even if it's somebody I really want to talk to and really want to hear their thing, it's just like, it's so stilted and unnatural. You and I are interrupting each other and talking over each other, and there's the flow and the organic feeling of the energy. You just can't do that on Zoom.
Yeah, you can't.
There's
There's a new app that makes it easier that my buddy Andy Stumpf just gave me. Dylan, I'm going to send you this link actually. And it's interesting because it's called your online recording studio. Hold on. It's called Riverside.fm.
Oh, I use that.
Riverside.
I used that for years.
Oh, you did? All right. What do I know?
The thing about Riverside,
This new thing. You're like, yeah, I've used it for years.
Riverside is okay. I mean, it started getting wonky for me, so I stopped it. But the thing about Riverside is it records each side locally.
Okay.
So you don't have like your voice sounds normal and the person on the other end feels like they're on the other end.
Right.
It records both of them locally and then uploads them and then merges them. So you get as if the microphone is in front of each person.
Oh, okay.
So its
Hear that,
sound
Dylan?
quality's better.
We'll use that. Chris, I got to go do another podcast, but thanks
sure.
thanks
I'm just one of your podcasts today.
Just one.
How many podcasts are you doing today?
Fighter and the Kid.
Oh.
And then there's this.
What's the name of this one?
Bryan Callen Show.
Every time I meet you, you're doing a different podcast. Are you trying to lose your audience? You're trying to make it hard for them to find you?
I'm atomizing my audience. God damn it. I know. It's just a disaster. But guys, coming on this podcast soon, we're going to have debates, and I'm really excited about that. Dylan and I are kind of setting this stuff up because I want to pit these ideas. I want to take all the ideas, whether it's Ukraine, transgenderism, all that shit, sex, diet, vegan versus carnivore. I want to pit these ideas together, and whether it's a discussion or a debate, I want to see what happens when you throw all these ideas on the same table. Let them battle it out. It's not the people I want battling. I want the ideas battling it out. So that's what I think I can offer the space.
I'm doing a series. I have a Substack thing, and I'm doing two series. One is people who I kind of think are crazy, but what is it that I agree with them on?
I love that.
Right? So like anti-vaxxers, pro-Trump, whatever. Like I disagree with the extreme version of this position, but there are things that actually I see the point.
That's what I try to do with the woke thing.
Right.
A lot of it annoys the fuck out of me, but I get the sentiment. I get the I'm interested in the recesses in sort of what's between the lines here.
Yeah. There's an itch that's being scratched, and it's a legitimate itch, even if I disagree with the scratching technique. The other thing is things I wish I were cooler about. I think that's a good route to self-exploration. So you mentioned earlier you're a finicky eater. So am I.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit in with my persona at all. Like Mr. Adventure, I've been all over the world, but I don't really want to eat that. That's their skin, chicken skin? Oh, no, I don't want to eat.
You want to be more like Bourdain.
Yeah, Bourdain. Like people used to call me the Bourdain of sex when I was pitching this TV show. And I was like, I think Bourdain is the Bourdain of sex.